Influence, How to Exert It by Yoritomo-Tashi is a great resource to have and, in my opinion, invaluable in sales, leadership, and team building and other areas of one's life. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. In this video, we delve into part 2 of this audiobook series to extract valuable development tools. If you're new to my channel and found me at this video, please make sure to visit my book playlist and grab the first video of this book reading, where you will discover good information, in particular the influence of the eye, as the author explains the power of the gaze and how to use it effectively to supplement what your words wish to convey. I was thinking upon this topic and thought of the people in my life. Some seem to be natural influencers. There's something about them, as the French would say, that je ne sais quoi, a little magic, a little spark. It's a magnetism that seems to ooze out of them. And then on the other hand, the majority of the other people I thought of are rather bland. Not in a bad way, but in comparison to this energy that's emanated from people that influence others. And very few seem to be aware of the power of influence and that they themselves were being drawn into a magic net. Then there were a few that, in my circle, appeared to be in training or developing themselves in this area, and I applaud them for it. There is much more to gain in life when we seek to cultivate the best in us. And this train of thought led me to ponder, why is there such a great majority of people waiting for someone to prod them along? And it occurred to me that probably it is because there's no responsibility attached when you're a follower. No one is looking up to you, you're not in the spotlight, and if things don't work out, you will not be held accountable. You can just stay in the shadows unnoticed. So I noticed that influence is valuable because of its relationship to responsibility. I think that they're cousins, and I know from experience that not everyone has the backbone to bear the responsibility to use that power, or rather that skill, ethically and responsibly. Some may choose to manipulate or deceive others for ill gain, and you and I have seen it or experienced it firsthand. Another reason would be accountability, and while many of us have witnessed influential people under the spotlight of success, which came from their ability to present whatever they were holding dear with honesty and conviction, and those folks gained their position of trust, of authority and leadership on what appears to the majority good merits. But not everyone is ready to accept accountability when things don't turn out well. And even those people that looked upon you with such awe and such support will turn their backs. And that's kind of painful, to be left alone standing, holding the bag, picking up the pieces. So I get that, why some people choose to follow. In an age where media is accessible to many, to sell, to inform, to entertain, to educate, and so many other things, whichever end of the influence phenomena you're looking at, this video may provide you with further insights on this topic, which my intention is sharing things that may add value to your life. Having said that, thank you again for joining me. I now turn the page. Lesson 7, by decision. We should not confuse the virtue of decision with that tendency which certain persons display to decide any question whatsoever without having studied it, and too often without having understood it. Like all qualities, decision is only acquired after repeated acts of reflection, determining the coordination of ideas, and rendering those who devote themselves to it habitually ready to understand in a moment the advantages, at the same time as they perceive the disadvantages, of the acts they propose to perform. To attain this, we must take into account all the reasons indispensable for evolving decision. These reasons, said Yoritomo, are always dependent on circumstances which constantly assume a new character. For it is rarely indeed that in a man's life the necessity for the self-same resolution makes itself felt on several occasions, even in the case in which the present emergency seems to reproduce exactly a former event. We shall find in the manner of viewing it, in the forecasting of the consequences, even in the gradual change of our feelings, a number of fine distinctions which do not allow us to form the same opinion about it that we have in the past. In order to be able to discern and understand quickly to which side our decision ought to incline, in order above all to be able to sustain it, several qualities are necessary, at the head of which we should name: reflections or concentration, presence of mind, will, energy, impartiality, desire of justice, forethought. Reflection, or rather concentration, is the faculty of self-recollection, of shutting ourselves far away from every thought that is not the one that should engage our attention. It is force that we bear within ourselves, but which we develop to its highest degree by cultivation and application. It is by the habit of reflection that we succeed in reviewing very rapidly every side of a question and in weighing the pros and cons of the resolution to be taken. This habit, when it is constant, becomes a kind of mental gymnastics and allows us to range together in the twinkling of an eye the reasons which militate in favor of the conclusion or those which should decide the abandonment of the project which is proposed to us. When the balance carries it strongly to one side or the other, the decision is plainly indicated, but many cases arise in which the reasons in favor are quite as important and as numerous as those against, so that the undecided man stops to weigh them interminably. The man whom the regular practice of reflection has perfected, after having rapidly established this equilibrium, will withdraw his mind from these motives in order to summon others of a different order. He will bring in question of family, of convenience, of surroundings. He will weigh the consequences of acceptance against the inconvenience of refusal, and he will make up his mind in a clear fashion and one devoid of any regret. Now comes in the second factor, will. It is sometimes very hard to reply by a refusal to something which in the midst of dangerous advantages presents seductive aspects. It is painful also to undertake certain responsibilities and to bind oneself to onerous conditions. But the man who is gifted with will accepts this task with a light heart, for he knows that he is worthy of discharging it. However, this faculty, that admirable origin of the forces that govern life, does not always suffice to fortify decisions. It needs, in order to sustain them, to call its aid energy, which by continuous of effort comes to prevent the faintness which might affect these decisions as time goes on. Is there a need to insist on impartiality, the exercise of which is indispensable when considering one's innermost self? The majority of the irresolute loves to deceive themselves by the delusions which their imagination creates, and thus become only too often the architects of their own misfortune. Or again, the decision, sometimes too sudden, is dictated to them by one reason alone, which with their tacit participation takes on such gigantic proportions that it hides all the disadvantages which they embellish if they are forced to perceive them with colors which they know to be fictitious. Sincerity is also necessary with us as with others, and those who do not practice it regret sooner or later having disregarded it. It is from the same principle that the desire of justice proceeds, which should predominate in all our decisions if we wish that they brought us no remorse. Blundering selfishness can only dictate resolutions which have no foundation in rectitude, for sooner or later regrets will arise from the acts that inevitably follow, and the concatenation of events will become the punishment of those who have neglected the laws of their neighbor. The principal condition of decisions that leave no bitterness behind is the foreseeing of the events which these decisions may elicit. To foresee is to prevent, says an ancient maxim, and for want of foresight we often entrust ourselves to a quicksand where, in spite of every effort, we are miserably engulfed. We should not confound forethought with the art of divination, although in the eyes of the vulgar it sometimes takes on the appearance of it. Such persons, adepts in rational reflection, are so advanced in this science that deduction takes the place of second sight, and they succeed in formulating predictions which might pass for prophecies if they did not themselves take care to explain in what manner they have come to form their judgment. It is related that an ancient Mikado, pursued by ill fortune, assembled his soothsayers in order to obtain from them the means of averting the anger of the malignant spirits. After much discussion, they agreed that the only means of attaining this was to build a temple consecrated to the gods of evil, in order to appease them by paying them honor. This temple was to be built on a spot indicated by the magicians. However, the merciless gods demanded a preliminary sacrifice. A child was to be slain, and the temple to be erected on the place crimsoned by its blood. After lengthy Kabbalistic incantations, it was decided that this child should be the first whom chance led them to meet at daybreak in the neighboring forest. So the Mikado set out with the sorcerers and numerous retinues. The sun had just arisen over the horizon when they saw through the branches a child walking and making a way for himself through the denseness of the thicket. To seize him and lead him to the Mikado was the work of a moment. The poor child was immediately subjected to an examination by the magicians, who all agreed, declaring that his blood would be agreeable to the evil gods, and he was committed to the men-at-arms who dragged him after them, cruelly divulging to him what would be the tragic end of his captivity. Neither prayers nor supplications availed to move any of these fanatics, and the party pursued its course as far as the foot of a hill that overlooked the sea. Arrived at this point, the Mikado and his retinue stopped, for it had been decided to choose the flat land covering this hill for the building of the temple. The soldiers began to convey thither an enormous stone, which, after serving as an altar of human sacrifice, was to be the foundation of the edifice. The child, seized with an anguish quite comprehensible, followed with attention all the preparations. But in proportion as he formed an explanation of the work of the men, his countenance cleared, an expression of hope lit up his face, and in a little while he asked permission to speak. Permission being granted him, he bowed 3 times before the Mikado and cried, "O great prince, do not allow the work undertaken to proceed, for the gods of the forest are opposed to it." The Mikado, who was superstitious but not wicked, looked at him sadly. "Child," said he, "our soothsayers have decided it is thus. It is the only means of appeasing the anger of the malignant spirits whose evil influences threaten the safety of the throne. It is painful to me to sacrifice so young a life, but the welfare of my empire depends on it. Resign thyself and die bravely, in order to enter the realm reserved for valorous men." During this address, the child followed attentively the movements of the soldiers, and all at once uttered a cry. "Command them to stop, great prince, for a few steps farther, and the gods of the forest will destroy them." And turning toward the densely wooded forest, "Gods of my childhood," he entreated, "ye who have ever protected me, give me a fresh proof of our beneficent protection by engulfing up my tormentors together with the altars on which they would sacrifice me." Hardly had he uttered these words when, as if by magic, the soldiers who were pushing forward the heavy stone disappeared. Stone and all had been drawn into the bowels of the earth by an invisible power. The assemblage cried out at the miracle and hastened to cut the bonds of the captive, who was lost forthwith in the depths of the forest. It had sufficed him, for saving his life, to remember that, when pasturing his goats, he had been stopped by quicksand, which, had it not been for his nimbleness and lightness, would have made him their prey. To foresee that men, rolling a heavy block of stone, could not avoid being swallowed up, was thus easy for him, and this child, accustomed to the devices of the simple, which at every moment must protect their lives, had contracted, in the solitudes of the forest, the habit of rapid decision in all that concerns this instinct of self-preservation, so highly developed in all primitive minds. Threatened with immolation by men who wished to appease barbarous gods, his astuteness had forced on him the quick decision to strike awe into their minds by prophesying an event which foresight caused him to view as inevitable. This is the case of many soothsayers, but it is above all that of wise men, who only undertake an enterprise after they have foreseen its difficulties. Cells formed spontaneously as the result of change are too often produced by circumstances. If it is difficult to foresee their nature, it is absolutely necessary to recognize them under the vague name of bad luck and to take into account their happening, in order not to be taken by surprise when they burst upon us. In turning over a few more pages, we come upon a definition of decision, couched in brief and concise phraseology, such as the Nippon philosophy knows how to employ when it would sum up a thought in such a manner as to impress the mind. Decision, he said, is not a spontaneous movement of the mind or of the intelligence. It is the coherent and rational choice of performing an act to the exclusion of all others which might bear a relation to the idea expressed. Between the moment when the reason for the decision appears and that in which it is a question of making the resolve, all the psychic states which separate these two periods find place. We have just enumerated them rapidly, but in order to grasp them in their integrity and to make them serve for the accomplishment of our projects maturely conceived and rapidly inaugurated, a kind of mental gymnastics is not unprofitable. For example, it is well to place us in the face of imaginary resolutions and to make up our minds while striving to do so as speedily and wisely as possible. It will be easy for us to measure the wisdom of our resolution if we take as our end the events which surround us, and if we study the delicate cases which are within reach of our knowledge. It is well, on seeing arise among our friends circumstances of which we have no experience, to make use of them as a subject of our exercises, and to say to ourselves, what decision should I make if I were in his place? I do not say, mind you, that you would know all the details of the facts in such a way that it would be possible to reason from them with certainty. This method has the advantage of a check, for it allows you to verify the success of the decisions which you have made in imaginary cases. You can thus instruct yourself in this art, so difficult and nevertheless so important, for the influence which he who is accustomed to wise and prompt decisions exerts over others is always considerable. Further, when some time you devote yourself to this study, you will come to make it naturally and without any effort. Clearness of mental vision will develop within you to such a point that, without giving it a thought, you will come to pass a sound judgment on everything, and to discern quickly what is the solution proper to each. Soon the fame of your wisdom will spread abroad, and the weak-willed ones will come to gather around you to ask to each. For they are numerous who dare not venture alone in the paths of will, the creator of responsibilities. Their craven souls fear the regrets arising from a resolution of which they would have to bear the consequences, and they are like that man of whom the wise Hao-Va relates to the allegorical adventure. A man, he said, had to pass through a forest in order to reach a village where he hoped to meet fortune. He set out very early in the morning and hastened to reach as quickly as possible the outskirts of the forest. But when he had walked for some hours, he stopped and looked around him in indecision. The road laid out was long and monotonous. By taking a bypath across the wood, he had, perhaps, a chance to shorten it, and he lost his way under the great trees. He walked on for an hour and found himself in a glade. He tried to get his bearings, but, not knowing what to do, he took a road by chance. He went more slowly, for he began to feel fatigue and became quite dejected, when he perceived that the road had brought him back quite near to the point whence he had set out. He then took the opposite road, but he could not keep count of the windings that it made, so that after a long course he saw the glade again. That was for him the moment of a great resolution. He gave up definitely the side roads and set out on the first road, which he had followed and which led directly to the village. But the sun set behind the trees, night covered the forest with its veil, and the distracted man was obliged to interrupt his journey, now useless, for fortune had failed to wait for him. "Do not laugh at this man," cried the shogun. "You are for the most part like him. You wander in the labyrinths of indecision instead of following the way pointed out by the will. You lose your presence of mind at the first objection. You avoid being sincere with yourselves by avowing that you heedlessly lose your way in unknown roads. And when at length you pause before a definite course, opportunity has wearied of waiting for you. Despise these irresolute ones, you who aspire to become those whose influence radiates over the souls of others. Be counselors with well-weighed and prompt decisions. Do not stray in the bypaths of which you do not know the windings, and learn to become safe and enlightened guides for yourselves before pointing out the way to those of whom your influence has made attentive and devoted disciples." It seems that to add any comment to these teachings would be to risk weakening them, for these appeals, burning with energy, as well as the luminous illustrations that accompany them, can serve as a rule of conduct for the people of this day, as well as for the far distant disciples of Yoritomo. End of lesson. Lesson 8 by Rational Ambition. Ambition is accessible only to the brave. They alone can discover the treasure hidden within it, by breaking up the sham gems of illusion and intrigue. The words of Yoritomo should be known to all those who set out for the conquest of life. They should be inscribed in letters of gold on the frontals of schools where the young make their initial start, which, in most cases, decides their future. Ambition, again, says the old philosopher, should, equally with goodness or any other virtue, form the object of rational teaching. But for that it would be necessary to disengage ourselves from prejudices which brand it as a fault which we ought to dissemble. He is an ambitious one, says the vulgar, when they wish to discredit the achievements of a man whose aspirations raise above the commonplace things of life. They do not dream that, in order to form a genuine and productive ambitious man, it is necessary to possess a great number of qualities which people who pride themselves on their modesty will always ignore. What is understood generally by modesty? Is it the shrewd reserve of any ambitious man who fears to display his appetites in order not to be liable to restrain them before having found the means of satisfying them? Is it not too often the sham virtue which under the borrowed lineaments of humility hides the terrible defect of weakness? Would it not rather be the tinsel in which idleness, like the dress itself, up in order to abandon itself with ease to its favorable vice? Modesty can serve as a standard for all the vices which we have just mentioned. It is the enemy of courageous undertakings, of acts that require a display of energy that ambition or boldness alone can decide on. It is besides nearly always the sign of a want of confidence in oneself. It is again the safeguard of the self-respect of the incapable. Many weak mortals, irresolute, idle, or incompetent, instead of seeking to acquire the qualities which they lack, prefer to declare loudly, "Oh, as for me, I shall never succeed in attaining this end, for the good reason that I shall not undertake it. I am a modest person, I am. I have a hatred of fame and renown surrounding my name. I desire only obscurity, and I pity keenly all those who are tormented by a desire to shine." They say all this without thinking that the first condition of the being of modesty consists in ignorance of its existence. He who prides himself on modesty will never be a modest man, For the moment he sets out to establish his virtue, he acts like a braggart. If he is really convinced of his unimportance, if the diffidence of himself which he has is sincere, we should pity him very keenly, for he will suffer in feeling himself so insignificant, and this feeling will lead him, little by little, to hypochondria unless he inclines to the side of jealousy. Such is almost without exception the punishment of the weak. They have not themselves courage to undertake great things, and they do not forgive those who achieve them. There is, however, a kind of modesty before which we ought to bow. It is that of the learned man who, finding his happiness in the quest of knowledge and truth, makes no attempt to gain glory, and waits in the midst of his apparatus and his parchments for it to come to him, while preparing himself to welcome it with no more emotion than an ordinary visitant. This sentiment would be worthy of admiration if it were not often mingled with an invertebrate selfishness, behind which is hidden an indifference towards others, carried to the point of excluding anxiety to cause others to share in the benefit of one's discoveries. This kind of modest man, who ignores thus his duty toward others, is less useful to humanity than an ambitious man, who, eager to increase his fame, will make known the result of his work to the sound of the trumpet. For in order to be fruitful, everything in our life must bear relation to others. It is by developing ambition in their breasts that the leaders of the multitude have succeeded first in gaining a hearing and then in carrying conviction. What generous impulse can we expect from a man who has only one desire, to shut himself up in the selfish quiet of a life, the works of which he jealously keeps to himself? These facts, already true enough in the days of Shogun, assume a fresh significance in our time, when they might become the textbook of those whom we designate by the name of those who have arrived and who are in the majority of cases nothing if not ambitious ones. I was almost going to say, though rightfully ambitious. And why? Ambition, when it excludes unworthy means and spurns intrigue, is it not one of the noblest passions that could be conceived? National ambition furnishes our projects with wings, which allow them to mount above commonplace ideas. It is thanks to ambition that we experience emulation, which carries us along the better way. Without ambition, should we have knowledge of those marvelous discoveries which make up our age that of progress par excellence? And it might be said that Yoritomo set forth the splendid incentives given to the ambitious of our time by benefactors keen beyond measure on improvement, when he says, "It is a crime to destroy in the breasts of children, under the pretense of modesty, that self-confidence which should shine like a star in the hearts of all. It would be more useful, on the contrary, to found rewards for distribution to those who, with a noble end in view, devote themselves to undertakings somewhat called rash. Such are the veritable handmaids of destiny, since, by their desire for the better, they sometimes succeed in discovering an improvement which ameliorates the lot of other men. Besides, it is well that every effort should be rewarded by an increase in the possessions of the man who has made the attempt and who, by his special qualifications, has promoted a success the good results of which are never limited to him. Justice demands that inventors should derive profit from their inventions. This will allow them to devote more of their time to the pursuit of another discovery. It will perhaps be objected that there are some ambitious men who produce nothing, that whose success profits only themselves, and who cannot spread around them joy that arises from generous benefactions. The world is certainly populated with a large number of selfish persons, and it will assuredly be difficult to prevent this state of things, but it would be a serious mistake to believe that these people are altogether useless. Ambition is never without the great desire of attaining everything which gratifies it, and what better means is there of proclaiming its success than to command a large retinue, to give banquets, and to build palaces or plant spacious gardens. Even granting that the ambitious man who has attained satisfaction is hard-hearted and neglects works of charity, do not the workmen who labor in providing the trappings of his vanity profit largely by an ambition which procures for them the means of subsistence? By the law of human evolution, the money obtained by the ambitious will come of necessity to ameliorate the condition of the humble, in the same way as their works and their discoveries will always succeed in increasing the fund of public knowledge, for only the modest man is able to keep to himself the result of his labors. He would master fame or fortune, on the other hand, hastens to make public the most trifling success. True, he sometimes exaggerates it, but the fault is not his alone. It may be imputed to the habit of disparaging those on whom fortune seems to smile. I heard one day, said the shogun, a man whom I knew to be of a serious turn of mind relate that he had spent 3 years in completing a work. Now I had followed his studies with interest, and I knew that this task had acquired of him in all 150 days. I was therefore astonished, and questioned him on the reasons of a falsehood, which puzzled me the more that I knew his habitual truthfulness. Child, replied he, do you not understand that if I were to admit spending so little time in perfecting my work, people would not fail to find it incomplete or too lightly thought out? It is not sufficient to be capable. We must not shock anyone in proving overmuch this capability, for this assertion of equality, which they do not possess, causes suffering in the envious who do not fall to revenge themselves for it by belittling it to others. It is their method of succeeding in placing themselves in the same class. Unable to rise it to the level of people of merit, they try to bring the latter down to their level. The ambitious man escapes these cheap devices. He is from the first too full of his projects to give him time to insignificant jealousies. In short, he rarely resents the sentiments of envy, for he is always convinced that he will succeed in surpassing the success of those who are competing for the same goal as him. Moreover, ambition is a sure and swift means of influence. This is, in the first place, because men have always a tendency to follow the man who draws them in the direction of light and progress. Again, because it is almost always from the following of the ambitious that those are the chosen to attain honors and fortune. It forms no part of the program of the successful ones to drag after them the incapable or weak. This is why their influence over their pupils extends the more in proportion as the latter imitate and follow them. For the ambitious man is not displeased to raise himself near to him one who will step into his vacant place when he shall have advanced some degrees further. And here is one of the primary reasons for the influence which rational ambition can exert on the men's minds. The lure of gain or distinction binds men to train of him who is in a position to give such a way to them. It is in his power to be able to employ this influence profitably for disseminating good and the love of the better around him. It is in his power to instill into the hearts of his devotees aspirations towards a noble end. It is in his power always to put them on their guard against intrigues which would have the effect of diminishing the beauty of their ambition. There is between the ambitious man and the intriguer all the difference that separates beauty from ugliness. The first proceeds with head erect toward a definite goal that he has long and maturely decided to choose. He disdains paltry methods. He seeks only to attain the end that he has set forth before him. He goes without concerning himself with the stones on the road, his heart full of confidence, sustained by faith in his star, which he never loses from view, notwithstanding the clouds that hide it from time to time. He lifts his eyes too high to recognize the vulgar herd of the envious who swarm around his feet. He is content to spurn them with the tip of his shoe, unless overmuch beset or tormented by their incessant attacks. He crushes them underfoot, as we do with an importunate insect, which we try at first to drive away and which we destroy, without ill feeling, simply to rid ourselves of its repeated and irritating stings. The intriguer, on the other hand, rarely raises himself above the hoard or mean desires and paltry jealousies. Unlike the ambitious man, he acts with no other end in view than the procuring for himself of money or pleasure. No lofty thought has ever entered his head longer than the time necessary to turn it into account, while he considers it only under its mercenary aspect, and this accomplished, he passes to a class of ideas the burdens of which is never the same. The desire of distinction never haunts the dreams of the intriguer. He reduces everything to the narrowness of his aspirations and entertains no project that does not lend itself to his base sentiments. Is that what we should despise money and seek after poverty? Not so, said Yoritomo, for the poor man exercises little influence over the multitude. Again, most achievements demand considerable application and loss of time, and we could not lavish it in this way if we were obliged to take thought for the earning of our daily bread. It is therefore well to find resources which will allow the pursuit of an end without being compelled to give it up in order to provide the necessities of daily life, and which will also save us from the compromises of conscience which the greatest leaders of men must sometimes endure when they do not possess that advantage, indispensable to him who does not wish to diverge from his course, assurance as to the primary needs of life. This should be the first aim of the man who wishes to win honor, fortune, or distinction. Before rushing forth on toilsome paths on the chance of meeting such, we should be sure of the possibility of pursuing them and not risk missing them because the necessity of providing for our daily wants compels us to pause just when we had hoped to attain them. We cannot but admire once again the wisdom of Yoritomo, who once more is found in agreement with the great thinkers. Theognis said, "The man who is broken down by poverty can neither speak nor act. His tongue is tied and his feet are chained." It is only too true. Downright poverty is a disadvantage, for it often compels those who suffer to pay court to the fortunate ones of this world. In any case, it is a hindrance to all undertakings, which require sustained effort and peace of mind, which can only be obtained by those certain of the morrow. But you will say, everybody cannot be rich, and many, becoming so, have known poverty. Is it not then an insuperable obstacle? Poverty, he said, is a hindrance only if it consists in absolute want, and in this case it is usually the result of idleness or of mismanagement of our affairs. We should not reckon as poor the man who earns a scanty livelihood but whose peace of mind cannot be changed by the suffering resulting from the lack of necessaries. Such a one can, when he has fulfilled the duties of his station in life, devote himself to the aspirations of lawful ambition. Rarely does he enjoy independence, for in order to live, he has to accept many humiliations or spend a considerable portion of his time in quests which have as their object the insurance of his livelihood. If he is sincere in these efforts, he will not long remain poor, for he will soon find employment, no matter what, and if he is endowed with ambition, he will quickly succeed in distinguishing himself in it. From that time, poverty will be for him nothing but a specter of the past, for he will work to better his position, and he will soon become one to be envied. Poverty is only allowable if it is voluntary, which is to say, if it is the result of a decision which prefers that condition to another more brilliant but less independent. Nevertheless, riches are the key of many marvels, and they are above all the key of many influences. Not only is the man of great possessions in a better position to make those whom he patronizes listen to his words, but the prestige of his success surrounds him with a halo of influence, which, if he is wise, he will use to better the lot of his neighbor. We do not receive kindness from an empty hand. We have nothing to expect from a man tormented by care for the morrow. What words can fall from a mouth sealed by hunger? It is true that fortune, considered simply from the point of view of riches, is not an exalted ideal, but we must nevertheless welcome it as the consecration of success and as a power of which the wise man knows how to dispose for the good of his fellows. It is a means of exciting interest and of influencing the multitude, for the people will always be disposed to listen to the advice of a man who has had the ability to acquire great possessions. It is then in the power of the man who has been able to acquire this power of money to make use of it for establishing his beneficent influence over the minds of those who are disposed to trust in him. After his other successes, this last will not be a matter of indifference to the man who, while monopolizing the empire of the purse, will be proud to endeavor after the authority of the empire of the mind. Thanks to the prestige which his riches confer on him, he will be able to spread the rays of influence as far as the boundaries of the attraction of thought. And as it displays itself above all in action, he will gather around him a band of brave and intelligent men ready to imitate him in spreading abroad the ideas which he has inculcated in them and to speak as he has taught them. Do not wait for the desired object to come to you, but rise up and set out to look for it. When you have found it, you will undertake its conquest, and when it becomes your possession, you will gather together your friends to make them share in your good fortune and to tell them by what means it has befallen you. In acting thus, he will follow the teaching of Yoritomo, who said, "Ambition is a gate opening on magnificent gardens, but the fortunate ones who have entered it should not pause there. They will pass beyond the entrance in order to survey the road and to make a sign to passers-by, pointing out to them the way." And this profound psychologist adds, "A discovery brings no real joy to its finder until he can announce it, and we should rejoice at this almost universal law, for it is the cause of an improvement evolved by ambition, the happy influence of which awakens the instinct of conquest dormant in the breast of every man worthy of the name." End of lesson. Lesson 9. By perseverance. Persuasion, like good example, perseverance is among, if not the most brilliant, at least the most active agents of influence. It is a faculty born within them by men conscious of their power, those who, by virtue of faith in their own merit, advance to achievement with that confidence which gives birth to all notable successes and all productive achievements. Perseverance is the triumph of willpower over the weakness of the will. It is the result of a profound study of the determining causes, the combination of which is bound to end in success. It is, in short, the slow but sure ascent toward a goal that assumes a more definite shape the nearer we approach it. Few persons are born with a silver spoon in their mouths, but everybody can aim at conquering fortune by a series of continual and rational efforts. The man who would spring up 30 cubits at a single leap would spend his life in ridiculous attempts, but if he wishes steadily to mount the steps that lead him to that height, he will attain it, sooner or later, according to the dexterity, the agility, and the perseverance that he displays. The steps, it is true, are often made of shaky stones. They have gaps between them that make one dizzy, where they are so uncertain that it is difficult to keep a foothold on them. This is the point where those who possess the virtue of perseverance make themselves known. By their unshakable will, they can ward off every danger. They balance themselves on the shaky stones almost on tiptoe and advance on to the next step. They feel fascinated by the giddy depths beneath them. Quickly they raise their heads. They proceed gazing on their star, and they guard themselves against possible slips by making sure of one foot before lifting the other from the ground. For perseverance is the mother of many gifts. From her is born circumspection, which clasps hands with application and patience. It is incredible to what degree the man who is gifted with patience is proof against the pitfalls of fate. Hope and cheerfulness are two unanswerable arguments under most circumstances. Application comes to hold up their hands, and few undertakings can resist their combined influence. It is related that the greater scholar Huan Shi, plagued by the sour temper of his wife, who was jealous of his knowledge, could find no way of working at home, for this termagant went so far as to throw his manuscripts about and burn the sheets of vellum on which he set down his thoughts. He therefore resolved when he was at home to divide his time between gardening and contemplation, but from the time that he got into the palanquin which conveyed him daily from his country house to the town where he was employed, he recouped himself for his enforced inactivity. In this way he produced, after some months, a work of great value, which was universally commended and admired. News of this reached his wife, who asked him astonishingly how he found the time to write, considering that outside his professorship he was not engaged in any intellectual occupation. Huang Shi was a simple soul. He related to her how he had managed to reconcile his work with her unreasonableness. She was so affected by this proof of his desire not to annoy her, and so impressed by the calm and indomitable will of her husband, that from that day she ceased to forbid him to engage in work which brought him distinction and shed its rays upon her in the form of caresses that saved her wifely self-respect. Our modern civilization boasts many examples of this assiduous application. Dr. Good translated Lucrece while visiting his patients. He had in his carriage all the material necessary for the translation of the book, and in this way he made use of the minutes between each visit. Dr. Darwin did the same. He wrote his notes while going his rounds, and upon returning home he had only to classify them. One may also mention a man named White, who was employed in a law office, who learned Greek while journeying from the office to his home. We know the instance of Agassiz, who employed the time that elapsed between the announcement of meals and the moment when the company took their places at the table to write an excellent book, which he smilingly presented to his wife as a practical lesson in method and perseverance. History is rich in similar anecdotes, and this proves incontestably that saying of Bossuet, "A little suffices for each day, if each day acquires a little." Do we reckon what might be the production of 1 hour a day won from frivolous pursuits to which we give so many drops of our life fallen into the gulf of eternity? He, said the Shogun, who should cut down a branch every day would end up by clearing a way through the densest forest. He adds judiciously, but he should not think of going back, for the branches grow again, and he would find the way closed. That is to say that perseverance must never slacken. Return is not allowed to those who should widen the road for their disciples to follow, and we cannot repeat too often. It is by the power of personal effort and of application that the most brilliant and solid reputations are slowly formed. Experience, says G.A. Mann, tells us that we must have, in order to succeed, method in everything that we do and also perseverance. If we do not possess these two qualities, we should develop them, and that by thinking constantly of them and by contemplating the idea which represents them. Persevere, then. To what end do you say? Simply because by persevering you form your will, besides have the chance of attaining your end. Persevere like a brute. Not at all. It is necessary that in continuing what you have begun, your will, your intelligence, your sensibilities be ever on the alert. It is this unceasing activity in yourself that is the reward of your effort. The road on which you walk may perhaps not lead you where you wish to go, but probably it will lead you to a better place. And for your walk, you will become a good walker, which will be certainly due to the impulse which you needed to be able to attain the goal, that is to say, success. Will without perseverance and without method could not exist. Perseverance admits of a combination of active qualities and of virtues that might be called passive, for they demand no apparent effort. Nevertheless, they are more rare than one might think. for they are not often the endowment of weak minds. The latter can only, with difficulty, concentrate themselves on a task that requires a little application. They are the slaves of the instability of their impressions. Beginnings, however arduous, always find them full of enthusiasm, but this fervor soon grows cold, and if success does not present itself immediately, they will hasten to give up their project and devote themselves to another which will soon have a like ending. Unremitting action can also be reckoned in a number of these virtues, passive indeed, but indispensable, of which we have just spoken. The practice of bending the will to listen to some purpose is sometimes a talent of a high order, for it is one of the best means of winning the sympathies of those who are speaking with us. I hate, said Yoritomo, the sort of people who let their thoughts wander blindly instead of seeking to glean profit from what they hear. Nothing is more disconcerting than to feel the attention of one to whom one is speaking to drifting away and wandering after his thoughts, while you would like to convince him by your words. This lack of attention is always the mark of a vacillating will, which cannot bring itself to follow an idea by concentrating its mental powers or an examination of the various aspects which it presents. When dealing with inferiors, this frivolous attention may pass as a sign of contempt. Besides, it is always in opposition to the influence which we might exercise over them. What should we think of a chief whom a poor man comes to consult, and who, instead of listening to him kindly, should busy himself, as I have known them, in giving orders to his servants and arranging the hanging of his house, and should let his musicians go on playing? The unfortunate man would go out of the Lord's house with the bad impression, and if ever he had to seek help or advice, he would take care or not betake himself a second time to the man who treated his request with steady disdain. Influence over others is acquired especially by perseverance of the will and concentration of thought, the undulations of which projected around us come to reach the minds which we wish to impress. And, entering once more into the domain of psychology, the Shogun speaks to us of this fascinating mystery of the contagion of thought, which according to have as a primary cause of influence and cannot fail by perseverance determination to produce it. There is no doubt, he said, that thought is a contagious factor of influence, good or bad. Who has not had occasion to remark this in the case of fear? In an assemblage composed of the bravest people that it is possible to meet, taken individually, one man stricken with fear, or, if he can express his feelings in a forcible manner, will succeed in imparting to each of the rest, in different degrees it may be, the disquietude and uneasiness which he experiences. There are a few doughty warriors who, at the recital of something concerning the mysteries of the world beyond, have not felt a slight shiver, which the sight of wholesale carnage, together with consciousness of the gravest perils, could not have caused them to experience. This phenomena, caused by the irradiation of thought, is an undeniable proof of the influence which it can exercise, for not only is it possible to penetrate the minds touched by the undulations of our thought, but the thought of others, elicited by ourselves, comes back to us on the same undulations that are spread out from our brain. This is why we often see one who wished to shed fear or around him feel that same fear by receiving the waves of thought that he has produced in his audience. It is the same with laughter. Very few are they who can resist the infection of a burst of laughter. Even with those least inclined to merriment, laughter is infectious in a high degree. For at first involuntary, in a way mechanical, it ends by becoming natural, so that at the moment it breaks out, the simplest expression, the most sedate words assumes in the imagination so comical an aspect that merriment increases to the point of not being able to utter them without provoking a fresh outburst. But what happens if the next day we wish to relate to this incident? No longer submitted to the attractive influence of the thought of others, no longer receiving from them the undulations, the vibrations of which had reached us on the previous day, our state of mind is completely different. We perceive the inanity, sometimes we should say the foolishness, of what had amused us so highly on the preceding day, and no longer laughing over it ourselves, it is impossible for us to entertain others with it. On the other hand, if the storyteller, either of set purpose or spontaneously, begins by laughing himself at the remembrance of what he is about to relate, it is seldom that this merriment, if it appears genuine, does not spread to others, who will laugh at first by infection, afterward of necessity, because merriment is the pervading thought. What we have just said on the subject of fear or of laughter applies to everything else. With perseverance, you succeed in causing effectively to penetrate the minds of your hearers, the thoughts, the emissions of which will attract similar thoughts, and their undulations returning to affect you will increase your conviction, giving you the use of more power to spread it around you. It is from this standpoint that the Shogun sets out to oppose the emission of evil thoughts. It is, said he, a weapon which always recoils on the man who would make use of it. The evil thought traverses the same cycle as the other and returns to us strengthened with hatred for others. What can we expect from those whose minds we cause to germinate wickedness and the desire of evil? As soon as they believe themselves capable, it is against us, first of all, of that they will seek to exert themselves, and they will do it involuntarily by bringing back to us our thought, magnified and disfigured, so that we shall endure it without recognizing it. You see why perseverance should only be applied to the gaining of good, and as soon as we think we have come into association with it, it will be our duty to inculcate its principles into those who, living around us, are subjected to our influence. But we must not limit our effort to this. We must aim farther and higher. It will not suffice to initiate them into good things. We must also give them the taste to cultivate them, and to that end, and arouse in them the desire of perseverance, which makes possible the most difficult undertakings and gives us a power that we cannot limit. Like some steel implement, the drop of water perforates the rock, wears away the hardest stone, and without slacking pursues this work which the implement would have begun more successfully perhaps, but the breaking or wearing out of the tool would have interrupted, perforce, the work which the eternal drop of water accomplishes by the tenacity and perseverance of its action. Do not then seek to force slow-moving minds, but surround them, penetrate them by your perseverance, and its influence, sometimes obscure but always certain, will spread itself abroad in beneficent undulations, the continuance of which will create a power. End of lesson. Lesson 10. The prestige gained from concentration. Concentration is one of the most marvelous forces that can be conceived. Without concentration, no success is possible. If it is present, we must consider it as the work of chance, not reckon too much on its duration, and remember that the popular proverb which says, "He who comes to the sound of the flute goes back to the sound of the drum." In other words, what a chance circumstance has brought may depart on the wings of an unforeseen happening. Far different is the success which we acquire by reason, that having sought it and willed it with all our powers, we have strained every effort to evoke it and no longer hug it to ourselves for fear or that it should leave us. Fidelity to an idea is always the initial step to all successes. For if an idea has no time to become at home with us, if what is rightly called the crystallization of thought does not form the foundation of every decision, we shall find it impossible to give it definite shape, and it will fade away like impalpable smoke. If, on the other hand, we know how to exercise concentration, this idea will soon become a focus of organization around which the association of ideas will come to marshal the reasons that determined the action which we have in mind. Thoughts are things, said Prentice Mulford. Without wishing to follow him in his abstruse explanation of the statement, it is easy to imagine how true the saying is. Seeing that in thinking deeply on a subject, we succeed in picturing it to ourselves in an almost tangible fashion. There is no doubt, said Yoritomo, that concentration develops all our senses and brings them to a degree of remarkable acuteness. It stands to us in the stead of knowledge, for by its means we acquire the facility, that is to say, the gift, of realizing readily and easily the things of which we have formed a conception. There is no work, even manual, that concentration does not lighten for us. If a man has to lift a heavy mass, do you think that he will do it as well if he is occupied with some other thought as he said simply and solely, I wish to lift this mass? Then his nerves are at tension. All his faculties bend themselves to the act with a force necessary to perform it. His brain strives after the means to assist the physical effort, for the muscles are the slaves of the will. He, therefore, who succeeds in concentrating himself on a manual labor is certain to perform it with a minimum of fatigue, for he will be able to husband his strength, he will save himself from dissipating them in useless exertions, and he will concentrate all his faculties of attention, of calculation, of ingenuity, and of muscular power in order to succeed. This is how so many jugglers achieve perfection in their art. By concentration, they have reached such a point of self-absorption, therefore, them nothing exists outside their own particular performance. But if one day they, in a fit of passion, allow their thoughts to wander toward the object of their anger or of their love, they find that they are no longer themselves. Their actions become less sure. They make bungles and end up being unable to regain their nerve, except with a violent effort that drives away the fancy and allows them to recall their thoughts to the one point where they should keep them. To think of the act which we are performing, to think of it alone, to concentrate everything and forget everything outside of it, there is the secret of so many successes, the explanation of so many good fortunes, that also of the immense influence which certain men exert over their fellows. We must, said the Shogun, be able to concentrate ourselves on one act at a time, and to force our attention to the fullest degree to the manner in which we can attract others to imitate us. We are the shapers of our destiny, and we should aspire to become those of the destiny of others. To gain this end, nothing should appear insignificant to us, and if we think sensibly, we shall see that every one of our acts, however commonplace it may seem to us, is, if it is performed with the desire of good, a step toward a realization, sometimes imposing the fate of which, however, depends on a series of similar acts, equally paltry taken separately. But the essential for the adequacy of one of them might mar the perfection of the whole, if not jeopardize success altogether. And in his flowery language, the Shogun adds, what is one link more or less in the chain several meters long? So trifling a thing that its absence would not be noticed. Nevertheless, if this link is badly riveted, this insignificant detail will suffice to break the chain. Every work is made up of a chain of acts, more or less infinitesimal. The perfection of each of them contributes to that of the whole, and sometimes suffices or a slight slackness in the performance of one of these acts to jeopardize the success of the undertaking. In fact, which one of us has not had to regret negligence which has come to hinder the success of a project? In our age of electricity and of strenuous life, these remarks are still more true than they would be at any other time. Does it not happen every day the missed train causes us the loss of the benefit of some business, which because of the delay escaped us? Now, if we wish to be perfectly sincere with ourselves, we shall admit that on most occasions this delay is to only our own carelessness. We were too late for meals, or we wasted time on talk, which would have been quite easy for us to curtail. All the trouble arose from want of concentration, which allowed us to lose sight of the one thing that should have been for us of the utmost importance. If we will reflect well on it, we shall see that most of our troubles can be set down to carelessness. Take, if you wish, the case which we have just mentioned. A missed train prevents the settlement of the important business. Thoughtless people will get out of this by saying, I have not had a chance. Others, those whose thoughts are directed by a mastermind which is an adept of concentration, will recollect themselves, will mentally review all the passing events of the day, and will thereby conclude that they are responsible for that happening so deplorable for their interests. What can or should they do? Simply devote themselves to one of the exercises most recommended by thinkers. Concentrate their faculties on the principal act of the day, which was the settlement of the business which called them out, and, once well persuaded of its importance, suit all their acts to it. They would thus have avoided losing a few minutes or the hour which caused them to fail, for filled with their determination, they would have cut short any business that it was not indispensable to conclude, or cut off some moments from talk to the continuance of which was less important for them than the journey which they had to make. Each day, said Yoritomo, brings with it a round of duties of unequal importance. We must know how to distinguish that which should take precedence and subordinate to it our mode of life for that day. Everything that we do should bear a relation to it. Even if certain things should seem mutually exclusive, we must avoid them, inasmuch as they form part of the whole of those things which go to make up realization. By being willing to sacrifice nothing, we succeed too often in accomplishing nothing. We know the story of the man who one day found two robbers in his garden and set out to pursue them. He ran after them at first for a time. Then at a fork in the road, one of the two turned off to the right, while the other pursued his way. The man, undecided for a moment, rushed down the by-road, saying to himself that he would catch more easily the one that took the hard road. But after a time, out of breath, he perceived that he was not as quick as the robber, and bethought himself that the other was bigger and stouter, and on that account easier to overtake. He therefore retraced his steps and rushed along the main road. But the man whom he was pursuing had had the time, in spite of his want of agility, to gain ground, and the pursuer puffed and blew in vain. He soon had the mortifications of seeing him disappear, and his neighbors made fun of him. How many times do we act likewise, without perceiving it, when we pursue two different ends and give them up, first one, of then the other, according to the inclination of our idleness of our whims? This fault, too, will never be committed by those who practice concentration. They will never risk making themselves a laughing-stock like the men of whom Yoritomo speaks, for they will set out in pursuit of an undertaking only after reflecting deeply on the possibilities of success, and they will take every precaution against giving it up before they have brought it to a successful issue. They who would be adequately prepared for this kind of reflection ought to bring themselves to it by the habitual contemplation of a thought. It is well to maintain the attention on the alert, and to keep oneself from every distraction by the repetition of one or several sayings, the bearing a relation to this thought, giving it concrete and definite form, and persuading us of the necessity of concentration. Other methods also are employed with success. They make up those exercises which should be practiced by all those who wish to acquire any science, whatever it may be. Of these methods, several were already known in the time of Yoritomo, and it is he who recommends us that called of the collar. Have, said he, a collar containing about 200 beads of jade or any other stone. If your means do not allow you to make use of jewels, take care to string them not too close together in order to be able to take them off easily, and make them slide slowly one over the other, counting 10 between each bead. Your mind during this time should be occupied with only one thing: to allow between the beads the same space of time, that is to say, not to say the numbers too fast or too slowly, and to it in such a way, all the time that this exercise lasts, as to think thus regularly of nothing but good. When you find it impossible to keep up your thought, revive it as soon as you can and begin again. At first, it will be well not to extend the experiment farther than 5 or 6 beads. Afterward, you can increase it, and some thinkers are mentioned who had such a mastery over their imagination that they went right to the end of the beads without slackening. With the same collar, the shogun shows us yet another exercise. You will take off, said he, a handful of the beads without counting them, in such a way that you are ignorant of the exact number, and having fastened the collar together again, letting the place of joining be in sight, which will serve as a starting point, you will count aloud each bead that you take off with your fingertip. That done, you will begin again 3 times. If you find the same number each time, it means that your power of concentration has been sufficient to keep your attention without letting it wander. Where you find a different number, you should begin again until you obtain the same result 3 times in succession. We might smile at the simplicity of these methods. Nevertheless, those who are devoted adepts in concentration know how difficult these results are to realize if they wish to be sincere with themselves. Before obtaining the same count of beats 3 times, they must often begin the experiment over again 20 times, for thought escapes easily when one can no longer keep it in subjugation. The Shogun recommends us yet another exercise. Sit down, said he, comfortably on a seat soft enough to prevent your feeling any discomfort. This is very essential, for the least physical discomfort distracts the attention by directing it to the feeling of uneasiness which you experience. That done, you will rest your hands on your breast, the palms will open, the fingers spread out. The left hand will be placed near the girdle and the other near the throat. You will slowly pass the left hand down to the waist while you lift the other as far as the neck, taking great care, when the 2 hands meet, to touch lightly the tip of the middle finger of the left hand with the tip of the middle finger of the right hand. During the few minutes that this exercise lasts, you will do it in such a way as to think of nothing except the care of letting the fingers touch one another towards the middle of the breast, and in consequence of accelerating for retarding the movement in order to arrive at this result. During all this time, force yourself to think of nothing else. This is what our modern philosophers recommend us to the name of devitalization. Devitalization is the act of shutting oneself out from the external impressions and moral sensations. It is a kind of arrest of thought, or rather rupture of thought, which one concentrates on something so plainly commonplace that it gives birth to a sensible rest for us. This is the first step that leads to one of the most satisfactory forms of concentration, isolation. Without isolation, no meditation is possible, and consequently there is great difficulty in concentration. Now we have just seen what part this faculty plays in training the mind. It is that which allows us to rally our scattered physical powers and to unite them on the same point, localizing them alone on the phases of the subject that engages our attention. Atkinson recommends us to devote ourselves to the study of any object whatsoever and to force ourselves to limit the effort of our thoughts to that object alone. But this meditation may form the excuse for many mental vagaries. He advises us to take a piece of paper and to concentrate our attention solely on the thought of the scrap. But is not this, on the other hand, a dangerous excuse for fancy to come into play? Contemplate it. This piece of paper once formed part of some material. What material? Was it the white muslin of bridal veils? Was it, on the other hand, the flimsy fabric in which a courtesan arrays herself? Whose hands tore it? In what religious processions or in what wretched dens was it used? Later, by what changes did it come to this condition of a scrap of paper? The imagination takes a fire afresh. We conjure up the atmosphere of a factory. We think of the processes of manufacture, etc. You see that we are already far removed from concentration. Doubtless, Yoritomo also believes this when he says, if you wish to devote yourself sincerely to the practice of concentration, guard yourself against allowing your thoughts to wander from the corolla to the stalk of the flower. This means the one object alone, and that strictly limited, should engage our attention if we wish to succeed in controlling our attention to the point at which it responds to our first call, like an obedient servant. Many feather-brained people think it is a good excuse when they say, "It is not my fault, I forgot," not suspecting that forgetfulness is itself the fault with which they do not wish to be charged. It is an excuse glibly assigned by those whose moral infirmity is so evident that they are unable on their own accounts to make any effort worth the while. It is the excuse of the weak and of people lacking courage. It is a certificate of physical incapacity awarded to those who have not in them the energy to practice self-recollection. Meditation, which is closely allied to concentration, is the state of inward contemplation. which allows us to shut ourselves in from external things so as to engage our thoughts solely on the subject, which we have set before ourselves. The difference between meditation and concentration lies in the greater freedom allowed to thought in the former state. Meditation, said Yoritomo, is like a target of which concentration is the bullseye. Every arrow which hits the target has certainly attained its end, but those which quiver at its center are the only ones, in case of defense, would have sufficed to make our enemy bite the dust. And he adds, meditation is valuable above all because it is a rest. It is a kind of mental anesthesia which allows for us to have faith in our liberty of thought, even when, nevertheless, we still confine it, but less closely than in concentration. We could not devote ourselves to a fruitful meditation without being prepared for it by self-absorption. We must then allow ourselves to be slowly permeated by the idea which we wish to fathom and all the influences of which we wished to receive. But we ought to fear one redoubtable enemy, distraction. Nothing is more difficult for those who do not habitually practice this lesson than to meditate successfully without letting the thoughts wander after ideas which are connected with one another, but which end, by reason of their number of diversity, by being completely removed from the initial point. In fact, we have all experienced the impression of which the Shogun speaks. It has happened to all of us, after long periods of reflection, to find ourselves 100 leagues from the subject which we desire to conjure up, and when we wish to take account of the road traversed, we find ourselves altogether amazed at the imperceptible concentration of thoughts, which, without seeming to be foreign to the subject of our meditation, have drawn us in the direction of ideas completely dissimilar. This is one of the familiar phases of distraction, the foe of concentration. This is why Yoritomo puts us on guard against meditation, of which the dreaming is, he says, the mischievous sister. Let us beware, says he, of allowing ourselves to give way to daydreaming, for thus we should contract the undesirable habit of allowing our attention to drowse. Daydreaming is a woof on which fancy embroiders shapeless flowers. It scatters them without method or system at its own sweet will. These flowers are unreal, and their colors soon fade. Daydreaming is a dissipation of energy. It carries us away, and we cannot direct it. For this reason it is particularly dangerous, for it destroys our psychic forces and injures the development of strong mental powers. It was with this in view, it is said, that about the 12th century St. Dominic invented the rosary. He thought, like our Japanese philosopher, that meditation is so close akin to daydreaming that one should seek to control it by removing the temptations arising from the volatility of the imagination by means of a physical rallying of the idea. The telling of the beads has no other object. All the decades, and it a different prayer from the 10 preceding it, and, granting that the attention has wandered during the repetition of the 10 Hail Marys, the 11th bead, separate from the others and appreciatively larger, comes to remind us of the change of the formula and brings back the most wandering minds to the subject of the meditation. In short, such a director of souls as the Castilian friar knew well that daydreaming always possesses a pernicious charm, which it is well to nip in the bud. A great thinker nearer to our times, Condillac, says further, attention is like a light which is reflected from one body onto another, in order to illuminate both of them, and I call it reflection. Sensible ideas represent to us the objects which actually impress themselves on our senses. Intellectual ideas represent to us those which disappear after making their impression. He also says, intellectual ideas, if they are familiar to us, recur to us at will. This was also the teaching of Yoritomo, who writes, it suffices for those who practice concentration to will for the objects on which they wish to meditate to be recalled clearly before their eyes. Adepts in this art can, with very little effort, and after placing themselves in a condition of self-absorption, transport themselves in imagination to the sphere where the phases of the occurrence which forms the subject of their thoughts unfold themselves before them. They will succeed in picturing to themselves places and persons in living movement in so realistic a manner that they will even be sensible to the odors or the climate of the place that witnesses these happenings. What marvel that, finding themselves in this mental condition, it is easy for them to decide on sound resolutions and to thrust aside attempts to counsel for them the less studied decision? And he concludes, he who would influence others should applaud all things, know how to influence himself in order to acquire the faculty of self-concentration, which will allow of his reaching the highest degree of discernment. Many soothsayers have owed their influence over the multitude only to that spirit of concentration that passed for prophecies. It is wrong and delusive to give credence to magic which is trickery, but we bear within us a power equal to that of the sorcerers whose deeds are related. This is the magic of the influence, which the prudent and self-possessed man always exercises over his fellows, when his intentions are pure, and when his ideal is nothing else than the amelioration of the condition of others, by the wholesome influence of his example and his discourse. End of lesson. Lesson 11. By confidence. Confidence is the mental impulse that all those who wish to influence others should seek to elicit. For most of them, it is the means of replacing the vacillating and ever-faltering will with their own will, which they impose according to circumstances and according to the character of their followers. With some gentle persuasion is a means, even if slow, yet almost sure of success. But we must guard the future adept from a diversity of influences, otherwise his mind will always retain the most recent impression, and before following the course of initiation, we must give our attention to doing away with contradictory ideas, which he cannot completely eradicate except with great difficulty. This is one of the characteristics of feeble folk. Their stubbornness has always to be combated, and we cannot succeed in teaching them confidence except after prolonged effort. The best way left to us is not to hit them too hard, for their obstinacy, which they sometimes take for willpower, would form a troublesome obstacle to their conversion. It is therefore better to seem to pay attention to their opinions, however baseless they may be, and to put them before objections that appear rather involuntary than otherwise, and which to all appearances we regret the necessity of formulating. This is what Yoritomo teaches us in the following anecdote. My master Lang Ho, said he, had among his disciples a chief who had a great influence in the Senate, not on account of his personal qualifications, but rather of his wealth, which was considerable. He had estates, the extent of which gave him the privileges of a little king, and my master thought rightly that such a man should be gained over to the beauty of the good, in order that his discourse should not be like the tares of the field, but on the contrary, should resemble good seed, the sprouting of which brings forth whole course of bountiful harvest. But this nobleman suffered from the weakness of will that hindered him from profiting by any lesson. He would say, yes, one day, and the next day, after listening to the talk of those who have no other idea except to get money out of him, he would profess an opposite opinion, and set himself obstinately to allow the most pernicious counsels. Lang Ho, as I have already told you, was a profound psychologist, no recess of the human heart hidden from him. So after subjecting the chief to a lengthy scrutiny, he adopted the method which seemed likely to succeed. He did not dissuade him from acts which, under evil influences, this man had made up his mind to perform, but at first he, so to speak, canalized his infatuation toward things of less importance, the plan of which he seemed at first to entertain kindly. He was careful thus not to awaken the spirit of obstinacy which he knew was dormant in the chief's heart. But after putting him to the test at a time when the latter was no longer in a suspicious mood, Lang Ho enumerated to him the errors of his ways, and did not fail to declare what mischief would accrue from them. This done, he let him follow his own devices, or rather, those of his evil counselors. This policy had the result of allowing the troubles which he had foretold to arise, so that by degrees the chief began to regard Lang Ho with a kind of superstitious fear blended with a deep veneration. The philosopher waited no longer. He then took in hand the freeing of his disciples from his self-interested friends, and after some months of initiation the latter, imbued with the knowledge and wisdom of the master, seized all resistance and gloried in showing to those who depended on him that he shared the opinion of the sage. From that to conversion was only one step, and that step was taken so successfully that, under the influence of Long Ho, the chief became a genuine benefactor to all who lived on his estates and who looked up to him as a master whose word has the force of an oracle. But certain natures are restive under the persuasion, or too malleable for any impression to leave its marks on them. In such, therefore, it is well to inspire confidence, somewhat in spite of themselves, by having recourse to suggestion. All modern thinkers of this opinion, all those who are engaged with mental infirmities. A suggestion of any kind being implanted in the mind, says P.E. Levy, the organism is the better adapted to bring out realization. We too readily give an idea of magic to word suggestion. Suggestion, as the writer understands it, might be defined as follows: the development of competence. It is, in a way, the imposing of one's beliefs on the mind of others. It is not a quack method of enthralling a person and of compelling him to carry out tasks which we feel ourselves without the courage to perform. It is a noble faculty, which choice spirits alone possess, that of implanting their belief in those whom they consider worthy of being persuaded. Be it remembered that there is suggestion in everything, in the book which fascinates us and the theories of which gain possession of us in spite of ourselves, in the conversation to which we listen of our own accord, in the discussions of which only one side seems to us to express the truth. But it happens too frequently that if afterward we recollect ourselves in order to judge our thoughts with the same impartiality as we would those of others, we are altogether amazed to see the fine enthusiasm that had animated us fail. The principles of the book, stripped of the magic of style, seem to us highly debatable. The conversation which we enjoyed, when the illusion of eloquence no longer illuminates it, seems to us insipid, and the object of discussion, which had interested us deeply, becomes a matter of indifference to us when we examine it calmly. To what then is this sudden change to be ascribed? Does it arise from us? From our over-susceptibility to enthusiasm? From our excessive propensity to fleeting impression? In most cases regarding these suggestions, we should accuse only their authors, who, not being convinced themselves, have been unable to imbue us with a lasting confidence. To inspire confidence, without which no influence is possible, several qualities are indispensable: sincerity with ourselves, hatred of injustice, certainty in our decisions, absolute truth in our predictions, confidence in our old merits. Sincerity with ourselves consists especially in the conviction of the necessity which exists of making others share in a belief the effect of which we experience so deeply, that the field cure to diffuse it abroad should seem to us dereliction of all our duties. You see why the appeal of missionaries is generally so powerful. The success of the apostolate is always subordinated to the sincerity of the convictions of him who expounds them, and to his certainty that he is performing a duty in inculcating them on those for whom they may prove a support and a consolation. If the speaker doubts his own statements, his voice will be less firm, the effulgence of his thought will less easily spread over his audience, and enthusiasm, the parent of absolute faith, will not lift them to carry him or them on their way. But how different a reception will be accorded to the apostle who is himself convinced. Let us listen to Yoritomo in this matter. Like a refreshing stream, said he, the words of he who believes spread into the minds of his hearers and quench their thirst of moral support and lofty convictions. Like moths attracted by the light of tapers, they will all flock around him who is for them the light and knows how to envelop them with its life-giving rays. As long as he speaks, vistas of brightness are spread before them. If he vanishes, they seem again to pass into darkness, only brightened by the remembrance of the words of confidence and faith. He who knows not hatred of injustice will never be able to exercise a salutary influence on others. How could he attract to himself confidence, the mother of conversion, if by the unfairness of his judgments he is subjected to that of others? No partiality, said Yoritomo, should animate him who would win souls. It is by allowing himself to fall into such lapses that he will lose all authority, which he would fain acquire. Strict justice alone should direct his words and preside over his acts. Where he is himself quiet in the dark and does not see on which side justice is ranged, he should refrain himself until the time when a close concentration permits him to see clearly before him. If doubt continues, let him be careful not to raise decision the injustice of which events might demonstrate, thus weakening the trust which his disciples are pleased to place in him. It is more honorable to confess one's ignorance than to risk committing an injustice. To secure certainty in our judgments, it is prudent sometimes to use artifice, like the sage of those whose shrewdness Yoritomo tells us. It should never happen, said he, that man who wished to inspire confidence should risk seeing it destroyed by assertion that is not borne out by facts. In this matter, it is wise to imitate the old philosopher Hongji, who should never say, that will happen, but you have acted in such a way as to bring on yourself such or such a misfortune, or you are acting with so much prudence as to deserve to be rewarded, so that when events happened to confirm his learned forecast, he did not fail to recall his sayings, and his authority thereby increased more and more. It should be added that the events foreseen always came to pass, for the deducted powers Hongyi were great, and it was easy for him to presume the acts which his disciples might be expected to perform. But foreseeing and even prophesying are not sufficient to gain confidence and especially to communicate it. In order to implant it in the hearts of others, it is necessary to possess it. This splendid confidence in oneself that works wonders. Then it is that all those to whom thinking for themselves is a labor, those whose powers of resistance are fitful and ill-balanced, those whose moral idleness rises up against all individual initiative, will lift their heads and feel a new strength, relying on the feeling of confidence which they will experience first in the Master and afterward in themselves. The healing balm of faith will by its good qualities impregnate them in this gentlest fashion, and despising the faint-heartedness which hitherto had marked their most trivial resolutions, they will advance fearlessly toward the goal which has become plainly visible to their sight. It is a well-known fact that an imagined support often serves as well as the support itself. We know the instance of the child who cannot bring himself to walk without stumbling, but who, as soon as we stretched out a finger to him, pretending thus to support him, steadies his steps in such a way that he can accomplish a walk of several yards without tottering. If, however, we draw back the finger, which, as it seems to them, is the support you must guard them from falling, they advance a few steps with difficulty and cannot avoid tumbling down. It is the same with timid souls. The person who thinks he will die of fear in the solitude of an empty house will feel quite reassured if he imagines that the adjacent rooms are occupied. The presence of others, creating a feeling of confidence in possible protection, suffices to save them from fear, which they would not fail to experience if they thought that in case of need there was no one to help them. This protection, even when they know it to be illusory, suffices to allay their apprehensions. Thus, although they are quite sure that they can expect nothing from this intervention of a child, timid persons almost always seek such company rather than remain alone, and they experience from it a real relief. Every impression, says Yoritomo, which is not our own, which comes from outside, is an influence, which we perforce put up with. It is especially in cases of sickness that this influence can make its presence felt in the highest degree. For at such time, the subject being very weak is best disposed to submit himself to any suggestion whatsoever. There is a vague solidarity between mind and body, which allows of the latter becoming as easy prey to others brought about by suffering. It would be idle to deny the connection between our physical ills and our mental sufferings. Some, under the domination of weighty anxieties, become the victims of severe headache. Others, again, after repeated emotional disturbances, contract heart troubles. It is, therefore, sometimes wiser to cure the mind before considering how to care for the body, or rather, it is well to effect both cures at the same time. Now it is that influence makes itself felt, triumphant, radiant. It stamps on the nerve centers an impression which reverberates through one's whole being. Considering that our troubles are due to pain, to anxiety, to hypochondria, we should cultivate confidence and cheerfulness which take from our conceptions their somber coloring. If we have been able to inspire the invalid with competence, we shall be glad to tell him that he is getting better, for he will not doubt the truth of the assertion, and that assurance will cause him to experience a real improvement. Then it will be in order gradually who tries that gesture on him, making clear to him the development of his cure up to the moment when he is told, "You are cured." Miracles have no other basis than this. And the Shogun proceeds. But the grandest means of effecting these cures is to implant in the mind of self-imagined invalids the idea of devotion to a noble cause, to plunge them into a tide of ambition that will make them gradually forget their everlasting ego. For this over-coddled ego is the real cause of most of these disorders from which all persons suffer, whom a surfeit of ego so dominates that their most trivial ailments command their whole attention and seem to them to be entitled to command that of everybody else to the exclusion of all other things. On such influence should be exercised in quite different a manner. It will suffice to create about them an atmosphere of activity in which their personality will play a dominating part. They will forget to spend their time in looking out for the attacks of an illness which exist only in their own brain, and he who assists them to a cure may congratulate himself doubly, for he will have made his beneficial influence felt in the case of both mind and body. Assuredly, the best of suggestion is that which lies in, as it were, devitalizing the self-centered man, by substituting for the worshipper of his ego an altruist who, thoroughly imbued with faith in himself and strong mission which he believes himself entrusted, will seek to impart to others the benefits of that confidence from which he has derived so much consolation. Thus will the advice of Yoritomo be proved right when he says, "Let him who feels himself to be in the right and has confidence in himself rise up and proclaim his faith, so that the weak, the vacillating, and all those who suffer from doubt may flock around him to warm themselves at the genial blaze that issues from the fire of contentment of which his mind is full." End of lesson. Lesson 12. Acquisition of dominating power. The warriors of old, says Yoritomo, were very fond of insignia, which they believed to be likely to impress their enemies. They liked to wear fearsome masks, the manes of beasts, or helmets the top of which represented the heads of an animal. One great general arrayed himself in a helmet the tip of which bore the feature of a mattock, and on the visor were engraved characters the combination of which represented the words mattock, way, and rock, which the learned have interpreted as follows: "If the way is not opened by my mattock, I will lay it out even in the rock." Now, what idea dominated all those warriors if not the desire to impress their enemies, some by fear, others by intimidation? But there is a kind of influence 1,000-fold more valuable than all these rude methods and barbarous attempts to bring an emotion by means of bloodthirsty symbols. The domain of thought is open to all those who feel themselves unworthy of entering it. It is for those who know the turnings of a beautiful garden with multifarious paths. On each fresh excursion they discover some hitherto unknown paths, which they explore always with increasing interest. The flowers which border them are gorgeous or poor, according as they shed on them the rays of intelligence placed at the disposal of the powers of the will, which are latent in them. But those whose languid action cannot lift the torch, whose indolence neglects to enkindle it, do not enjoy the sight of these diversified flowers. In the gloom from which they look on them, they perceive them but indistinctly, and the path seems to them so uninteresting that they lose the desire to seek in it for new objects. Those, on the other hand, who know how to throw the floral beauties into the light, derive from their contemplation so exquisite an enjoyment that there always arises in them the desire for fresh explorations, and also the wish to share their admiration by introducing some persons to the marvels which they have encountered, and by teaching others how to see them in all their splendor. This is the secret of the dominating influence which certain men exercise over others. Those alone who know how to throw the flowers of thought into the light, after having sought and found them, can acquire sufficient power to influence the destinies of others. This is what in language less florid but nonetheless ornate modern thinkers tell us. There is, says D'Urville, an intercommunication between ourselves and others of such a nature that perpetually, night and day, we are receiving and giving forth again influences which model us, change us, and gradually alter our mode of life. It is, therefore, through instigation from without that we, and by making ourselves what we are, good or bad, happy or miserable. Again, Atkinson says, thought plays a decisive part in human life. It encompasses the individual. It is the cord which binds him to his fellows, and by means of which are gathered together to join and mingle in a single current all surrounding energies. This is likewise the opinion of Turnbull, who recommend this method of acquiring the power necessary to first subdue those whom we wish afterward to influence. Lay well to heart, says he, that this person is an instrument through which pass mental currents, and that you yourself are an instrument which not only produces, but also receives and retains strongly such currents to receive and retain. You can then begin, without hesitation, to make him speak, while making a judicious use of a fixed, unwavering look. Employ all your tact and finesse in doing so discreetly. At the same time, you retain unmoved your own power, as if you were concentrating yourself on yourself. By causing mental currents to pass before your interlocutor under the form of timely questions and suggestions, you awaken in him responsive currents. You find out his likes and dislikes, and by encouraging his confidence, through the current derived from an approval delicately expressed, you will soon succeed in making him vibrate in unison with yourself. He who would acquire the power of domination that allows him to subdue to the action of his beneficent force the minds which he wishes to direct, must above all compel himself to create between him and his disciple a client of intellectual level that will be of infinite service to him in his apostolate. It is by creating sympathy that these vibrations in unison, so indispensable in the formation of influence, will be obtained. Sympathy begets confidence and paves the way for beneficent suggestions. He who knows how to attract sympathy, said Yoritomo, is like a kindly light toward which turn all those whose minds are covered with moral darkness. Their development is really very speedy, and that is preferable, otherwise they would be bedazzled before being enlightened. It is better to attract them slowly but irresistibly. Then, already imbued with the distant radiance, they will already have come out of darkness when they approach quite nearer to him who is to give them clear light, and, grown familiar with the brilliant rays, they will endure its utmost intensity without flinching. It is in fact one of the powers of sympathy to attract slowly, but to retain surely, those who feel themselves drawn to a sympathetic person by an attraction at first vague and ill-defined, later justified by 1,000 reasons, the principal of which, and soon the only one, will be the attraction which he possesses dominating power exerts over others. It is better, as Yoritomo says, for this power to assert itself less roughly to have more chances of permanency. It is preferable to illumine slowly people's minds with a well-defined gleam than to dazzle them to the extent of causing them a discomfort, which will make them seek the darkness as a relief. One of the secrets of dominating power lies in exciting similarity of feelings by adopting for the time being those that are within the compass of the person whom we wish to influence. The feeling of the condescension should be given up by strong minds. He who believes that he is lowering himself with regard to his disciple by instilling in him principles which he regards as too elementary will never succeed as a director of men. The master who would use the power of suggestion in earnest should for a moment give up his own mind to adopt that of the man who he is teaching. This is the only way of creating a bond of mutual confidence. He who would teach the first characters in writing should be able to create a child's mind in himself, said Shogun. He must admit that, to fulfill this condition, it is necessary to be already in possession of a rare self-mastery. Now he who can master himself is already qualified to master others. If ambition and confidence in one's worth are the attributes of dominating power, self-sufficiency is always the stumbling block over which he trips, whom pride prevents from looking down at his feet. Self-sufficiency almost always begets arrogance, which is of no use in producing sympathy and competence. This exaggerated idea of ego is never dictated by the consciousness of real merit, but rather by the imaginary swelling of virtues that we ascribe too freely to ourselves, as though to divert our minds with the noise of our own words. If we wish to be sincere, we shall recognize very quickly that these virtues are imaginary, and that the parade which we make of them arises only from a great desire to possess them, that the power having failed for assuring the gaining of them, we prefer, by proclaiming loudly that we possess them, to shirk the effort of acquiring them. This is why self-sufficient persons, in the category of whom we must place those out of whom an empty pride beats out nobility of character, will never have the aptitude for exerting an influence over the minds of others. Unable to derive from themselves the energy necessary to become what they would like to be, they cannot emit around themselves that power which fails them, and their domination over others will never be established. Melancholy persons, those who are the victims of hypochondria, are by no means destined to become shepherds of the multitude. Melancholy almost always begets a mental condition bordering on indifference. It suppresses the desire for life, the key of all good resolutions and continual perseverance. Every good effort of the melancholy is quickly halted by that terrible, "What is the good?" which proclaims the end of everything and the vanity of life. What influence can a man exercise whose powers of energy are destroyed by indifference and apathy? He has hardly the strength to live himself. Where will he find the strength to teach others? Cheerfulness is one of the requisite conditions for controlling others, not that boisterous mirth which is made up of bursts of laughter, the reasons for which are not always the most refined in nature, but that inward peace which we define as cheerfulness and which is the mark of highly developed minds. A man of fine character will never be melancholy. Hypochondria is the trademark of the incapable. It is the commencement of manias and of all crazes that desolate humanity and abase its moral level. The philosophers of ill omen, whose teaching has clouded so many young brains, have defined enjoyment as follows. Ah, well, but is not that worth an effort, to suffer no longer? And can we regard as a madman the man who labors to end this suffering, by substituting for it the joy of living, which opened men's minds to the cult of beauty? The art of happiness lies especially in the great wish to live. If Yoritomo was not willing to raise the burning question of free will, he nonetheless admits the unquestionable influence of each one of us on our own destiny. Men, said he, are for the most part like the fool who shivered, cowering in a snowdrift, while around him the sun bathed the mountain with its burning rays. He cursed the snow, the cold, the hateful country where he dwelled, and the misery of his existence which had to be spent in suffering and barrenness. In vain people signaled to him of nearby paths, in vain, for they showed him from afar flowers gathered on the way. He was obstinately bent on doing nothing to free himself from his sufferings, and continued to curse the place which it would have been so easy to leave, and deplored the unhappiness of the fate which had caused him to be born in that inclement country. Have we not here, in very truth, the picture of the pessimist who denies the existence of happiness and beauty while pretending to turn away when they pass his door? Such persons may perchance exercise a pernicious influence over weak minds, but it will always be limited, for we cannot repeat it too often. Real influence over others is only acquired at the price of complete mastery of oneself. This mastery should be the aim of the efforts of the man who wishes to possess this faculty and to make use of it for his own happiness and that of those with whom he comes in contact. Again, said the Nippon philosopher, we should keep ourselves from too commonplace associations, for, granting this truth that the thought which we emit about us is taken in by those around, we ought to be aware of the imbibing of commonplace thought which, when repeated too often, will end by occupying, unknown to ourselves, a place in our brain, and will weaken the quality of the power. The higher type of man should never harbor a medley of ideas. He who frames thoughts, the waves of which spread themselves around him, succeeds by a succession of undulatory movements which may be compared with those of sound, in striking the intelligence of others by setting their brains in vibration, in other words, in a state to receive the floating thought. But the really forceful man, one whose secret energies are concentrated on the gaining of influence, one whose aim is to acquire dominating power, will harbor no ignoble thoughts, for he will not barter away the first to arrive at these flowers of the mind. If he finds himself among people of small intellectual caliber, he will surpass them with all the mighty power that his knowledge and his strength will confer on him. He will know how to listen to them, then talk to them, perhaps to convince them, but not for a moment will he submit himself to imbibing their commonplace thoughts. For having come among them in the spirit of an apostle, he is too conscious of his own excellence. He knows too well his own superiority. He is, in a word, on too lofty a pedestal to allow himself to be affected by things beneath him. Does the granite stoop to the ivy that twines itself about it while mounting toward the towers in its need of protection and support? The shogun remarks also that this plant, which without the support of the granite would trail miserably off the ground, ends when it has covered the surface at every point by forming an essential part of the building, to such a degree that its frail tendrils effect more for the durability of the works of man than the hardest marbles chiseled by the most skillful workmen. And he asked, how many ancient towers that seemed of unquestionable solidity crumbled to pieces when deprived of the parasites that seemed to overrun them? So it is with all those who possess power. They maintain themselves only because they create disciples whose devotion serves to consolidate their work. But if they cannot retain the influence which at first they have sent forth around them, their followers fall away one by one, and the man left alone soon sees the edifice of his superiority crumble to pieces. Dominating power, Yoritomo proceeds, is developed especially by an apostolate, the exercise of which, by creating a mental current between the master and those whom he is teaching, wards off opposing currents. In the cant of modern science, it is said, in fact, that material builders, drawn by the attractive force of thought, are always displeased in feeble minds by a stronger influence, but that the converse does not hold good. Such is the comment of the Japanese philosopher when he tells us, "Do not rub shoulders with a commonplace mind except with intention of raising him to your own level, but do not think of entering into mental communion with such before making it worthy of it." This luminous sentence may serve as a commentary on Yoritomo's entire teaching, for every line of his writings is an appeal to energy, an invitation to the practice of the cult of moral beauty, and an encouragement to that advance toward the better, which should guide our steps toward the enchanted temple on the facade of which are emblazoned these eternal words: truth, courage, and cheerfulness. End of lesson. And now we also have reached the end of the reading, Influence, How to Exert It. If you haven't done so, please be kind. Hit that like button, share this with like-minded people, and subscribe to the channel.